Happening? Welcome to the Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forum's Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forum's Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition, taking a look at the late pick four sequence. Saturday afternoon down at the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club. You've got two Grade 1s mixed in there. You've got the Grade 1 Pacific Classic as well as the Grade 1 Del Mar Oaks. If you listen to this thing podcast form, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you listen over on YouTube, click that subscribe button. You get all the latest that we pump out from DRF TV. Give us a thumbs up. Always appreciated. Over on iTunes, write us a little review. Give us a rating. Thumbs up as well, there as well, excuse me. Like I said, we're going to go over the late pick four sequence. We're going to kick things right off. Race number 8. The way I'm going to go about this, it's also worth noting, something that you're going to want to keep an eye on. I will have a pick 6 video for this day on Saturday coming out probably sometime on Friday afternoon. So I'm going to make the videos different because, again, with a pick 4, you're afforded the ability to go a little bit deeper considering the 50-cent base bet as opposed to the $2 pick 6. And guess what? You got two of the legs that you got to deal with in pick 6. So let's kick things off with race number 8. It's the first of the Grade 1s, the Grade 1 Del Mar Oaks. Mile and an eighth on the turf course for fillies, 3-year-old fillies. This race to me, I've been waiting for Philly to come back. I talked about how much I loved her. I liked her in the Summertime Oaks. I liked her in the San Clemente. We're going to take a look at her runner-up effort most recently in that San Clemente. This is Ollie's Candy. I thought everything basically went against her in that spot. And the fact that she ran as well as she did, she has tactical speed. I think she can be a little bit closer than she was that day at Del Mar back on July the 21st. I just think she's the horse to beat in here. I know they're going out to a mile and an eighth, but she looked pretty darn good at a mile and a 16th in the main track 2 starts back. I have no real issues with the mile and an eighth. You lose Corey Nakatani because unfortunately he's injured, but you pick up Tyler Bays, so I don't think there's any sort of an issue there. To be honest, I think this is just a scenario where you're looking at a horse that makes a ton of sense in a spot like this. She's paired up by her tops of 90. I usually think that sort of precedes a forward move. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get up into that mid-90 range for her on Saturday afternoon. The number 4, Ollie's Candy, she's going to be an A in here for me. When I really started thinking about it, she could be a standalone A because I do quite like her. But there are two other horses that I'm certainly, I think they're dangerous. Let's put it that way. The number 7, Colonia, coming in from Arlington Park for Graham Motion and Joel Rosario. I thought she was awesome in that Hatuf. That was her first start here in the United States, first start in a handful of months. 86 buyer, fits really well. Only concern now is what did she beat that day? That field hasn't come back particularly strong. If she gets an honest pace, boy, I think she's a legitimate threat. She finished very, very nicely that day. You get Rosario here this time around as opposed to Joe Bravo. Colonia, I think, is a legitimate threat to win this race. She would be my second pick in here. The other horse that I'm interested in using is the horse that I picked in the Belmont Oaks, if you want to go all the way back to that preview edition. Fatale Beret. I didn't think she ran poorly in the Belmont Oaks, but I didn't think she ran great. But the 90 buyer that she and Paved earned, along with the filly that I spoke about earlier, I think, I mean, they share the co-highest last out buyers in the field, but I just think the 90 that Ollie's Candy had earned, I think, is a little bit more impressive to me as opposed to the ones that Fatale Beret and Paved earned running 6th and 8th in a field of 10. I still think Fatale Beret, though, has a big, big chance in here, and I'm going back to that Providencia. If she runs that race, I think she's right there at the wire. That was back in April, and she earned an 88. You draw a line through that honeymoon. You're left with that Belmont Oaks, which, again, was just sort of, not bad, but not great. I think it is interesting that Kent DeSormo is here, and he had ridden Ollie's Candy in the past, but this is the spot that he lands in. Those are the 3 big ones for me in this kickoff leg. I'm still up in the air about who's an A. Well, I know Ollie's Candy's an A. Is Colonia an A? Probably when it comes down to it, I will use her as an A. Is Fatale Beret an A? That's where I've got to start making a little bit of a decision. If you want a deep backup, a horse that I'm going to throw in as a C is the 8-horse California Gold Rush. California Gold Rush for Neil Drysdale. She looked like she was going to be a monster. Those first 2 starts, she won going down the hill for Drysdale at 27-1. Then she comes back and she wins an N1X back in February. Unfortunately, she's been gone since then. And even her 2 most recent workouts, there's a pretty significant gap in there, about 2 weeks worth of time. That, to me, is a little bit of a concern. I think this is a tough spot for her to be making her return, but at the same time, she clearly showed some ability. To me, again, she's a deep C. So the 4 horses that I plan on using, the 4, the 7, the 5, and the 8 in that order, 4 and 7 are definitely A's. 5 is probably a B, if I'm being honest. I don't know yet. I still got time, luckily, to figure that out. The reason that I'm hemming and hawing about the 5 Fatal Beret being moved up to an A is because there's a little instance down the road later on in the sequence that I'm interested in some horses, and I'd like to be alive to as many as possible. So let's turn the page. Let's move on to race number 9, a wide open maiden special weight affair. Second leg of the late pick 4 is a pretty wide open maiden special weight race, excuse me, for 2-year-olds, 6 furlongs on the main track. This is the race to me. There are a couple of horses that I'm most interested in, and we'll touch on those, but then I'll just kind of rapid fire rip off some other ones that I think you just have to go very deep in this spot. The 2 that I'm most interested in, I've said it before when we talk about 2-year-olds this time of year, whether it's at Del Mar, whether it's at Saratoga, whether it's at Arlington, whether it's at Gulfstream, wherever it is. A 2-year-old with experience is always going to have a leg up over a horse that's making their first lifetime start, no matter what barn they're coming out of. That doesn't mean that the first-time starters can't win, obviously, but those ones that have got a little bit of experience, little experience goes a long way. And 2 horses that I was very impressed with in their first lifetime starts. Let's start off with Dueling. Dueling's the number 8 horse for Jerry Hollendorf. We're going to throw up the replay of the career debut for this 2-year-old Violence colt. I love the way that he finished. You're going to see Asa Espinoza. He ends up losing the whip going down the lane. This horse never changes leads, but I love the way that he finished with some gusto. He galloped out pretty well. I think he's green. I think he can run just like all the other Hollendorfer 2-year-olds seem to be at this meet. They all just seem to be live and ready to roll. They paid almost $500,000 for this horse. You see they got Seattle Slew on the bottom half of the pedigree. This one, to me, makes it look like, you know what? If he can get out of the gate a little bit better, now you get Drayden Van Dyke. Hopefully we don't lose the whip this time. Additional distance is going to be beneficial. I would just like to see a little bit more early speed. If this one can stay within shouting distance early on, I think Dueling is a very, very likely sort of candidate to win and here and break his maiden. The horse drawn just to his inside is Istanbul. Istanbul goes out for Jim Cassidy. Now, Jim Cassidy's numbers with the first-time starters, they're not great, but they're not a disaster. Second-time starters, they usually take a step forward. We're going to take a look at that stretch run right now as well. You're going to see very, very wide, that big snow bunny on the outside, the big gray. Look, again, they paid $160,000 for this son of He's Had Enough. He's Had Enough stands for $5,000. The way that he finished, I kind of liked it. I thought it was a determined effort down the lane. And you know what? He got beat by a horse that I think is pretty good in Roadster going out for Baffert. Roadster's another one. He's going to have to work on his little bit of gait issues, but at the end of the day, he looks like he's a stone-cold runner. Istanbul, though, that race, we'll find out if Saturday is the day that it starts to come together. I do wonder if that's going to be the key 2-year-old race of the entire meeting. That one that they ran on July the 29th, race number 6 at Del Mar. You can go back and take a look. I believe they've already had a next out winner, but I think there's a lot of that race. I think is loaded with horses that have potential and can run. I think Hefe is going to be an interesting one for Keith DeSormo. I do wonder, he certainly needs distance, but I wonder if it's going to be turf as opposed to dirt. I just think that race is one that if you haven't seen it, might want to go back. Del Mar does a very, very good job of throwing all their replays up on YouTube, and they're all in 1080p. Like it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and you get the load, the entirety of it, and you get the entirety of the gallop out. Del Mar. Well done. I like it. Everybody else should be taking note. Those are the 2 that I'm most interested in because they have some experience. They run fast already, and if they take a step forward here in the second lifetime start, they're major, major players. The concern is neither of them are particularly fast early on. Then you bring in sort of the X factors, the unknowns. A horse like the number 4, No Treble. He's probably not fast enough or talented enough, but he at least has shown good early speed. He dueled in that most recent start, his second lifetime start for Luis Mendez. I think maybe he's forwardly placed. I don't know if he's good enough to win, but he's one that I'd use as a backup. I think the inside horse is interesting. Street Class going out for Michael McCarthy. You see the pedigree. It would suggest that he's probably going to want to run all day, and maybe he's going to need one. McCarthy's first-time starters are hit or miss. I just can't get past that gate drill most recently, 47-2, the second best from 82 going a half mile. I think that's an interesting spot. Gaffalione is listed as the rider as well. I think that's an interesting thing to see him out on the West Coast if it does come together there. 2 other horses that I'm interested in. The 10 game winner, simply because, hate to say it, you're breaking from the outside. It's Baffert. Rosario has the mount. Rosario's in town to ride Accelerate. We'll talk about him in the P Classic. That outside draw seems to be pretty cushy. If he has any ability, he figures to be forwardly placed. And again, the Baffert horses, they seem to be firing, especially the 2-year-olds. The other one, though, that I'm very curious to see what we get, and maybe Saturday's not the day, but maybe this is a name that you want to keep in the back of your mind and see what he does. The number 6, Asano. Asano goes out for Keith and Kent DeSormo. Keith DeSormo's first-time starters, they usually don't really fire their best. Occasionally, they'll win at, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1. But usually, his horses take a little bit of time to sort themselves out. I think the most fascinating thing about this horse, though, he's by Tisnow, and you see the pedigree at the bottom of the dam. Out of Donerail Court mare named Courtly Choice, the important thing to note there, this one is a half-brother to Wild Dude. Wild Dude was a multiple Grade 1 winner. We know what he was capable of on his best day. I believe he's still trucking along out in the Middle East. He's certainly not what he once was when he was over here winning Grade 1 races, but Asano, to me, is that kind of horse that perhaps down the road he ends up being something. If it's not Saturday, maybe it's down the road, but he's one I think you might want to keep an eye on. So I know I just rattled off about half the field. The two that I'm most focused on are the 7 and 8, Istanbul and Dueling. If I had to pick between the two, probably Dueling, just because of the connections. No disrespect to Jim Cassidy. But it just, if I had to lean one way or the other, probably toward Dueling, but at the same time, I think you want to use both of them. And then again, those other horses that I made mention, the 1 Street Class, the 4 No Treble, the 6 Asano, and the 10 Game Winner. Hopefully, we can get out of the maiden special weight race still alive, and we can get into the Grade 1 Pacific Classic. On to the Grade 1 Pacific Classic, 1.25 miles, 3-year-olds and up on the main track. Yes, Accelerate is in this race. Yes, Accelerate is strictly the horse to beat. He's going to be a heavy favorite come post time. There are a couple things that maybe you want to throw a little bit of caution at as far as Accelerate is concerned, though. First start since May. They talked about running him in the San Diego. Whether you believe it was a combination of things, whether you believe they just really were high on Catalina Cruiser, which understandably so, whether you actually believe that John Sadler and company were very, very content in just training him up to this race. Which, again, he worked the day after the San Diego, and he worked well. So I can't sit here and say that there was any sort of underlying issue. But still, he hasn't run since the end of May. Now he's going to come off the bench at 10 furlongs. Never an easy thing to do. But I think he has squashed that sort of 10 furlong concern, recently anyway, as a 5-year-old. You lose that sort of relationship, though, between he and Victor Espinoza, because Espinoza is recovering from that terrible injury. You get Joel Rosario, which is fine. Rosario's a good rider, but you never know. There's always a little bit of, I hate to say a learning curve, because the race will be over in 2 minutes, but there is something to be said, I think, about that kind of thing, where sometimes horses have good relationships with certain riders. I think Accelerate is probably the best. No, I shouldn't even say that. He's the best horse in the race. I don't know enough about Baffert's Argentinian horse, Roman Rosso. To me, he would just be nothing more than a backup. Baffert says that he's a 1 mile 3/8 horse. They're going to take a shot. Doesn't sound overly optimistic, but again, Baffert's been known in the past to just be like, yeah, maybe. And then they run a hole in the wind. Flavian Pratt is named there as well. Accelerate is certainly the horse to beat. No question about it. I'm going to use him as an A just because if I have some other prices that come in, I don't want him to be the reason that I don't get through. And I understand some people look at that and say that's not what you're supposed to be doing. You have to keep in mind, again, if I can catch a 8 or 10 to 1 shot in one of the other legs where there's a heavy favorite, I would feel like an absolute fool if I didn't hit it because I just said, oh, you know what, Accelerate, I don't want him. But I'm not picking him. He's one of my A's. But my pick for this race is breaking from post position number 3. You can go back to the recap edition on July the 23rd, I believe it was, when I talked about the Eddie Reed. We're going to take a look at the stretch run of the Native Diver going back to last November. You're going to see prime attraction on the front end. And he's going to be that goofball that he always is. And then I had said in that recap of the Eddie Reed, I would imagine they're going to go to the Pacific Classic as opposed to the Del Mar Handicap. It's indeed what they did here. He's going to run in this spot. Kent DeSormo retains the mount. This horse has an affinity for the main track at Del Mar. He's going to do things that drives me nuts and drives anyone else that cares about things like lead changes and X, Y, and Z. He's just a dope. That's him. At 5 years old, you ain't going to change him now. But the talent has always been there, and he's always hinted that he has this sort of ability that he can fire. And look, on 4 different occasions, he's cracked over triple-digit buyers. 101, 104, 102, 101. That Native Diver, to me, was the best race he's ever run. He was forwardly placed. Everything was going well. I also think there's a scenario and a case to be made that he is dirtied up on paper, that he's better than what it looks. The San Antonio, I thought you needed to be inside. One reason or another, that was a little bit of a weird race. Keep in mind, that was when Collected never went to the front. You had giant expectations wired that field, snail's pace, all sorts of weird things. The San Pasquale, I thought he ran arguably the best race considering how wide he was. Especially when you consider I thought you needed to be toward the inside of the racetrack that day. And then in the Big Cap, I liked him. I picked him. I'm going to chalk it up to the wet track and say that he just didn't appreciate it. He's 0 for 2 now on wet going. He comes back off of a long layoff. That Eddie Reed was his first start since the beginning of March. And I thought he ran well. I'm not going to sit here and say he was spectacular, but I thought he ran well to dig in the way that he did, only beaten by a neck when he was out there cutting out the fractions. Second off the bench, 1.25 miles is not a problem for him. You keep Kent D. Think you're going to be forwardly placed. Maybe you catch Accelerate off of the bench, and maybe he's not totally primed and ready to go. They got bigger fish to fry down the road. They're looking Breeders' Cup. Roman Rosso, maybe he's a monster, maybe he's not. You get past them, the Lieutenant, I understand he ran really well when they shipped him out to New York. I kind of feel like I know the Lieutenant. Then is he getting more pub because he's Justify's older brother? You know, Dr. Dorr, I haven't been impressed with him recently at all. Beachview, I think Beachview is interesting underneath, but I don't think he can win this race. After that, Pavel's the horse that if he wins, I'll lose everything. I just feel like that Stephen Foster, that was fool's gold, baby. I'm good on the connections for shipping him there because he ran just sort of blah in the Gold Cup, and they quick decided to send him to the Foster, and you just happen to catch arguably the weakest Grade 1 field you're going to find. By the way, speaking of that, Matru, the third place finisher, here in a 95 buyer. The 4th through 8th place finishers of a Grade 1 event, the Stephen Foster, none of them have earned a buyer of 90 or greater in their next start. All of them 89 or less. I think that might have been the weakest Grade 1 that there is, that we've seen at least in some time. If Pavel wins, I lose. And I love the horse. I'm a fan of the horse. But in a spot like this, I want no part of him. I'm going to go with 2 A's. I might use Roman Rosso as a backup, but I'm leaning kind of against that. My eggs are going to be in the 3 and the 5, but most of them in the 3. Prime Attraction. I'm going to go with Prime Attraction to upset everyone in this year's Pacific Classic. Accelerate the horse to beat. But I wonder if you're going to beat him, is Saturday the time? I'll take a shot with the number 3 Prime Attraction in this year's P Classic. Last leg of the late pick 4 sequence Saturday down at the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club. It's non-winners of one other than a mile and 16th on the turf course. This is a tough race as well. I don't think you get any real cheap races out of this sequence. I think you're going to have to make some decisions and take a stand one place or another. This one, I'm focused mainly on 3 horses. I understand Royal Albert Hall makes the most sense from a speed figure standpoint, but I don't trust that horse the slightest. He's 2 for 34 lifetime and 17 times second or third. I'm not using him at all. If he wins, I lose. I'm going to use the 2-horse Pioneer Lad. I understand maybe distance is a little bit of a concern for him, but I think distance is a little concern for a number of these horses. I like the form that he's been in. Jack Carava's barn, it seems to be warming up a little bit. You get Tyler Bays aboard. I'm going to use the 2 Pioneer Lad. I'm going to use the 6 Any Questions off the claim for Steve Knapp. Knapp has done good work over the past. This is a horse that I think the distance is a little bit better for him than maybe some of these other ones. And he has a number of speed figures on his page that are good enough to win, and you get the 5-pound bug aboard. And I'm going to use a horse that, to be totally frank, I've always hated. I've never been a fan of Kentucky Colonel, but we're going to go back and look at his most recent start. This was in the bottom line starter handicap out at Santa Anita on June the 23rd. I like that he sits, he rates kindly, he goes on with a run, and he just lasts. Now, that part at the end, that's my main concern, that he just lasts. That race was at a mile. Now he's got to deal with a little bit of extra ground, extra 16th. I don't know if that's going to work for him. But Kentucky Colonel is a prime example. If you pull up his PPs, especially lifetime, go back through all 15 of them, there is a stark contrast in what this horse has done since he's been gelded compared to when he was not gelded. And I didn't like him when he was not gelded because you could go through, he had a number of instances. One, he wouldn't pass a parked car. His only lifetime victory prior to this sort of stretch post-gelding was in his second lifetime start at Del Mar in gate-the-wire fashion. After that, he hung like a chandelier in a number of different instances, and then he just didn't fire for one reason or another in so many different spots. And Mandela had always thought highly of this horse. I basically called him a bum at one point. Then you're going to take a look right at the top when you look and see the sort of information of the horse. You see that he was gelded on the 12th of October, 2017. That was right after that really just disaster in the non-winners of 2 lifetime race. He comes back, goes down the hill. I'll draw a line through that and give him the benefit of the doubt. Then they stretch him back out. Bang, he goes through the N2L condition, takes a few months off, comes back, needs one off the layoff. Now, maybe that's another concern, too, that we've got a little bit of a pattern of him needing a race off the bench, but needed one off that N3L, comes back in an open 20, bang, wins that. Comes back in that starter allowance, bang, wins that. This is a horse that he's a different horse ever since they've gelded him. I'm going to use him. I'm going to use those other 2 horses. Truth be told, I'll probably put something together with more horses, with some more coverage. It's just a very wide open race. This, to me, would accelerate in the P Classic for most people. And I'm just speaking very generally. With accelerate there, I think a lot of people are just going to look at that and say it's a free square. With the Del Mar Oaks, you have interesting alternatives, but I do think there's a real scenario where the favorites are the right horses. Then that leaves you with that maiden special weight race, race 9, and this race to button things up. And I think those are the 2 races where you can get a little bit cute and try to spread out a little bit. I mentioned those 3 horses. I'll probably go a little bit deeper. Fritz Johansson down on the inside, he makes some sense. I do wonder if he's still the same horse at this point in his career that he once was. 2, 6, and 8, those are the ones preliminarily that I'm looking at as A's. Past that, there may be some other backups just in case, but I do think this is an interesting late pick 4 sequence, and again, I can't overstate it. Take a look over on video.drf.com or the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel. Coming up Friday afternoon, I will have a pick 6 ticket put together, including the first 2 legs. So this pick 4, wanted to go a little bit deeper. We'll try to trim some things up for that pick 6 sequence, and that kicks off, I believe, with the Del Mar Handicap, which is an interesting race. You can go a million different ways in that one as well. So fun sequence, fun day of racing down where the turf meets the surf. Down at Old Del Mar on Saturday afternoon, the Grade 1 Del Mar Oaks, the Grade 1 Pacific Classic, the Grade 2 Del Mar Handicap. Plenty of great action all over the place. And then you've also got some graded stakes up at the Spa on Saturday afternoon as well. That's going to button up this preview edition. If you've been listening live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. Thank you for doing so. If you've been listening podcasts like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, and Spotify. Again, you're over on YouTube. Click the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. You're over on iTunes. Write us a little review. Give us a positive rating. Always, always, always greatly appreciated. Questions, comments, concerns, fire away at me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt, or beneath the video player on the YouTube channel. I will be back on Tuesday with a recap of all this action and then some. We'll give you the weekend's best buyer speed figure performances, little stakes montage, X, Y, and Z. Got it all covered for you as we get deeper and deeper and we get closer into next week. Next week, pretty big weekend up at the Spa. It's going to be the Grade 1 Travers, and we'll find out, again, if the 3-year-olds can kind of sort themselves out. But first things first, let's enjoy the weekend coming up here upon us right now. Wherever you're playing, however you're playing, whatever you're playing, best of luck this weekend. This has been the Matt Bernier Show.